Hello and peace to all of you. I would like to argue today that public values that govern modern society, particularly liberal democracies, are grounded in monotheistic ethics, contrary to what many philosophers and historians of the Enlightenment and of the 20th centuries have argued, because all of them have tried to locate the ground of modern rationalism in Greek rationalism. Cannot be farthest from the truth. In fact, there is a little that modern society could resemble of Greek society, as I will try to show today. It is important for us to therefore begin by looking at Greek ethics as opposed to monotheistic ethics. This could really help us start to understand the ground of modern ethics, particularly the public ethics in liberal democracies. Now let us look at the major elements of Greek ethics. First of all, it was an ethic of honor. It was a very much aristocratic ethics. It's about the individual and the reputation of the individual and how the individual is considered and looked at within the Greek nobility. Those values are quite different, as we'll see, from monotheistic ethics. They are grounded in equal dignity of people, in human dignity, not in honor. Social hierarchy was very central to Greek society. In fact, in Athens, where only out of 70,000 residents of Athens, only 7,000 were free people, were citizens. The rest were either artisans who have to depend on powerful families within Greek for their protection, and the rest, these were really a sort of small group of people, relatively speaking, and then the majority were slaves that were in the service of the citizens who devoted themselves to art, philosophy, and politics. So then if you look at the Greek society, the Greeks looked at the rest of humanity as barbarians. Anyone who was not a Greek was a barbarian, whose life is worth nothing. He could be killed or should be killed or enslaved with no consequences. And finally, the Greek were deists. They believed in God, or let's say the Greek philosophers, beginning with Socrates, all of them, they affirmed that there is only one God, but that God was very aloof, was disinterested in this world. They didn't care about human actions and human society. He was a pure reason, as they put it. Now compare that with Islamic ethics or monotheistic ethics, because I will try to show that Islamic ethics were really the basic monotheistic ethics, but unlike in early Judaism or the Israelites, where the prophets took on themselves the role of bringing society back to its moral ethics, it became the responsibility of the intellectual, of the scholar, and particularly Islamic rationalists have tried to develop those concepts that we call monotheistic ethics. So first of all, it was an ethic of dignity. Human beings have dignity. All human beings have a sacred spirit or person. Their lives cannot be taken at will, no matter who they are, except when they are committing aggression and in self-defense. Again, rather than looking at social hierarchy, monotheistic ethics insisted on egalitarianism, that all people were equal in dignity. Even prophets and kings didn't have higher dignity than any other human being, as I'll try to show shortly. Again, within Islamic ethics, Arabs and non-Arabs were equal. Particularly, they were. I mean, if they were Muslims, they were brethren in faith, and if they were just other religious community, they were brethren in humanity. So the idea of barbarians or people who are not part of us would be like lesser human being. This has never been entertained or accepted within monotheistic tradition. Of course, there were certain deviations, but this was not really the original position of any monotheistic tradition, from Judaism to Christianity and finally to Islam. Then we all know that monotheism is about the oneness of God, the unity of God, that there's only one God, and that is not an aloof God, but it is a caring God and compassionate God. This has been, of course, the argument of all monotheistic traditions. Let us, therefore, try now to look at where are those ethical values came from, what we call monotheistic ethics, that provide the foundation of modern ethics of equal human beings and of public life that must be based on ethical principles, and actions of politicians and of political leaders must be evaluated on, ethically. Now, for us, we take this, for granted. We don't really argue about this. This is a self-evident thing for most of us, but it has not been always the case in the history of humanity. And it took a long time of struggle to move us from a society made of masters and slaves to a society, at least in principle. No one can argue that there are humans who don't deserve equal justice and equal dignity. But even those who would like to deny equal dignity and equal justice will sugarcoat their argument in a very universal principles and justifications that would not dare to take away equal dignity of people. Now, the monotheistic ethics are grounded in what I would like to call the Abrahamic act of rejection of polytheism, or the rejection of idol worshipping, worshipping of idols that humans have created. In fact, this was the point that he shared with his father. He asked his father, how would you worship those idols that you yourself make them and move them to their places? His father, according to the Torah, Genesis and Jubilee books of the Old Testament, explain that the father of Abraham confessed that he doesn't really believe in them, but he would dare not challenge the established religion of the community. In fact, he told him, if I tell them the truth, they will slay me. So the truth that these really idols were useless because they were made by people, worshipped by people. Yes, they symbolize certain deities, but even those deities were like have human characteristics of being good and evil and angry, and so the gods of the polytheistic societies that preceded the monotheistic tradition, and the traditions, of course, because we have three traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Those societies did not have any rationally defensible argument. Everything was imposed, and nobody would dare to challenge the king. And so that's when Abraham, having this sense of moral agency, meaning the responsibility to speak truth to power, he decided to take a stance. That was really, this stance we'll see repeated throughout the history of monotheistic traditions by prophets, of course, and later on by leaders and scholars who rejected any deviation and tried to call their people to the truth at the expense of sometimes putting their lives in jeopardy. So if you look at modern society, particularly public life, public space in modern society, particularly in liberal democracies, there are three cardinal principles that govern that space. Number one is moral agency, that individuals are responsible. And that moral agency is, as I said, grounded in the Abrahamic faith, in the Abrahamic tradition, in monotheism. And we find that really one of the historians who have discovered that this populism, this rebellion against a corrupt elite, was a very unique to monotheistic traditions. It was mainly in those traditions that people rose against their leaders when they felt that these leaders became unjust and never took care of the public space. So we have moral agency. Equality before the law was also part of the evolution of the monotheistic tradition that later on became part of this secular state where the law is supreme, particularly natural law, the law that was based on, according to the Enlightenment philosophers, on the law of nature. But this idea was in fact developed early on in the Islamic rationalist tradition, and for them it was not nature outside the human being, but these moral and ethical principles were grounded in innate human values that people, the Islamic rationalists have argued that people have, they understand, they differentiate between good and evil as they differentiate between beauty and ugliness. And in fact, they used the same terms. They talked about an ugly action and beautiful action. Beautiful action is an action of rightness, of dignity, and of justice. So we have moral agency, equality before the law, and equal dignity. So let us quickly go over, look at the ground of these three cardinal principles. Let us begin with moral agency. Of course, moral agency we found in Abraham, this young man then, who challenged his community because he felt that they are doing something that cannot be understood. It's irrational. How would you worship stones that you are really giving them shape and moving them around? They don't benefit you, they don't harm you. Why would you worship them? Of course, their worship was important for the king and the priestly class, because through this worship, they force people to submit to the will of the king, who seems to be like representatives of the divinity on earth. This continued, in fact, until well after Jesus Christ, until Rome embraced Christianity in the 3rd century of the Common Era. But we could see this moral agency in many, this was part and parcel of the Hebrew prophetic tradition from Joseph, who continued to be committed to this moral agency, never succumbing to the pressure of the community to behave like they do. Even the wife of the king could not seduce him to go beyond what he felt. This is what I have to commit myself to. these are the transcendental values that define human dignity. Moses, the same thing. Moses could have really lived as part of the elite class in Egypt, because he was part of the house of Pharaoh before he challenged the injustices of the Egyptian, soldiers who were treating the Hebrews unjustly, and eventually he ran away and came back with a mission to free his people, the Hebrew community, as was instructed. He insisted was instructed by the divine, by God. That takes us to the second principle of equality before the law. Now, the origin of this principle was in the Sinai Covenant, when Moses took the Israelites from Egypt to the Holy Land. In fact, as they were passing through Sinai, he received the tablets, the commandments, and then there was a covenant that took place not between the Israelites and Moses, but between the Israelites and God. So this was a covenant that was made with God. God has a covenant with Abraham, but his covenant was not with Moses after the Exodus, but was with the Israelites, which meant really that everybody were under the law, including prophets, including kings. This was unheard of in the ancient world, because everyone had covenant with the king, and the king was the source of law. The king was practically above the law. He and of course his entourage, his people, the people who supported him. But not was so with the Israelites. The prophets came one after the other every time the Israelites, or of course the confederation of the Israelites, which was a confederacy of tribes, 12 tribes, became later a kingdom. And with the coming of power, then corruption started to show up. And those who were really sort of committed to power more than truth, put power over truth, were the priestly class, were the high priests that were very much close to the kings and served the kings, even if they have to bend the law to allow the kings to have his own way. But the prophets came to challenge the priestly class, the high priests, as well as the kings. Everyone, every time, deviated. We have a long line of Hebrew prophets, interestingly, concluding with Jesus Christ, who was really of that community. He was a Jew who saw the corruption in the community, particularly within the priestly class. They were using religion to enrich themselves and to support the king, and he challenged them. And of course, according to the biblical tradition, paid with his life for that. But according to the Quranic tradition, he was saved by God. But the point is, even Jesus came to challenge corruption and to speak truth to power. So the pinnacle of moral agency is speaking truth to power, because this is so important to prevent corruption and the perpetuation of corruption in society. There's nothing more harmful to society where injustice becomes the rule, and when the wealthy and powerful have their own way, even ignoring the transcendental law or natural law, those universal values that have to be applied on everybody, kings, priests, and ordinary people. And that leads us to the third important concept, equal dignity. Now, equal dignity has always been there in the monotheistic tradition. In early Judaism, ancient Israelites, in the Catholic Christianity, or what I would call shortly the Romanized Christianity, because initially, for many centuries, the Roman Empire took over and reshaped Christianity to become beholden to power, exactly like what happened during the Israelite kingdoms, where the kings brought, seduced the priests to support them. So did, the emperors in the Roman tradition, up until the Reformation, the religious Reformation, which was started with the Protestant Reformation, but later on also Catholics caught up with those reformations, and the Catholic Church went through reforms. And of course, current Catholic Church is not this Romanized church that always stood with power and put power over truth. Again, Reformation allowed to bring truth to have priority over power. So now definitely when we talk about monotheistic traditions, we should realize, and of course this is my point, not everybody within monotheistic traditions really were having this moral agency. Not everybody spoke truth to power. Definitely priests in the past stood behind the power, not with the truth. Of course, they didn't abandon the truth, but subordinated the truth to power. But prophets did not do that. And within the Islamic tradition, scholars and many scholars decided to speak truth to power and to limit the exercise of power, as I will show briefly in a few minutes. But that created what I would call the idealism-realism tension, because those who care about power are realists usually. Think, well, like, you cannot challenge a great power. You have to submit to it. But idealists will never submit. Of course, they will put truth first. Either they will withdraw from engaging with power, or they would challenge the power, as did, for example, Martin Luther in the Reformation, and before him, as it did Jesus with regard to the priestly and the class and the king, and as did Muhammad alayhi salam, and peace be with all of them, when he challenged the injustices of his community and called for the equality of people. Okay, so there's this tension. The tension is always there, and I would like to identify a few instances of those tensions that comes out of this idealism-realism dialectic. The first tension we see today between nationalism and universalism. And by nationalism, I don't talk about the nation state specifically. I'm talking about those ideologies within the nation states that privilege people of certain cultural identity and social identity, put them above everybody else. As you will see today in this new wave of populism, or even, let me put it this way, the far right, that are using race to justify, to say, well, those who are like us are equal, and those who are not like us are not our equal, and cannot treat them as equal, and we have to push them out and separate them from our communities. So you have this tension. In fact, all monotheistic traditions have privileged idealism without giving up with realism. So the tension has to be there. You can't be completely idealist in society, nor should you be completely realist. We need to make ideals and principles the framework within which realism would work. We cannot have a realism that is completely absolute, and where relationship between communities and between states, as sometimes we see international relations, is completely based on um, completely based on the rules of the game. So as if there is no transcendental laws, there's no laws that are above and beyond the individuals, and they have to observe them whether they treat their own people or treat another community of a human being. So nationalism versus universalism, we have this transcendentalism versus materialism, another tension, and rationalism versus traditionalism. And when I talk about traditionalism, I'm not talking about traditions, because even rationalism is a tradition. Traditions are okay, traditions are fine, but to try to free society in a particular practical practices of any tradition, preventing the evolution of a human experience and rethinking about the conditions and the reapplication of the universal values into new contexts. This is what I mean by traditionalism, and there is always that tension. Another important thing about the monotheistic tradition, and this is something you find almost in all of them, what I call here the value-based identity. So the most important identity of the individual is that identity that is grounded in the universal values. So justice, equality, freedom, caring about the weak, confronting injustice, confronting aggression. These are universal values, and those who really sort of commit to them, they have been sort of socialized into the monotheistic traditions. Of course, modern society, particularly European society, initially was grounded in that tradition. That, as I would like to show, it was really borrowed and it was adapted from the Islamic civilization and not from the Greek civilization. Because as I tried to show, Greek ethics has nothing to do, or has little to do, I should say, with modern society and modern attitude and worldview about how to deal with others. I am mindful, of course, that within modern society there are deists. There are people who don't think that God is caring and compassionate. They don't think that anyone will be accountable for their deeds in this life before a divine justice, in the after death. And that's definitely turn ethics into calculation, like what we call utilitarian ethics. It's about benefit, cost, and benefit analysis, which it can be okay for public policy, but it cannot be the ground of ethical behavior that is committed to justice, equality, and fairness. That leads us to talk a bit. I would like to talk a bit about what I called the Romanization of Christianity, and this fact is supported by historical writings. Probably Hegel himself, who has a very insightful view of history. Weber have also saw this sort of Romanization of early Christianity, early Catholic Church. Of course, the Catholic Church came out. It was the Roman Church, by the way, that fought the Eastern Church because they insisted on the absolute divinity of Christ, which many people in the Syriac society, where Christianity emerged, did not accept, and then they were sort of fought out. So doctrines became now the identity mark for whether you are Christian or not your actions, not whether you are just and whether you respect other human beings, but whether you submit a particular doctrine. And that was the landmark of Romanized Christianity, which to a great extent the religious Reformation in Europe tried to rid society of that, but there are remnants of that Roman worldview impacting some Christians today and creating again this sort of looking down at others and deciding that those who don't follow particularly the Christian faith, and those don't admit that Jesus is God, then these are denied divine justice, as if everybody's life is in vain, regardless of whether they are good, whether they are contributing, whether they are struggling with the truth, because people have to come to the truth through rational contemplation, as Abraham did when he challenged his community that was worshipping idols without thinking whether idols should be worshipped or not. So that takes me to talk about Islamic rationalism. Islamic rationalism emerged in the 8th century of the Common Era, and it emerged to challenge transcendental realism. There were people who were willing to support the Umayyad dynasty, arguing that this dynasty is willed by God, and they refused to accept it because they wanted to make the judgment of whether a rule is favored by God or not to use, as I pointed out, a monotheistic ethics as the foundation of that. And they have really pushed for, or advocated 5 principles. The first principle is the unity of divinity and of creation, so that divine is one, and the divine is a moral being that have self-restraint based on the very moral values he called the human beings to abide by. So God is just, God is faithful, meaning keep the truth and as the guide for the action, and by the truth is that it would be something based on universal principles, including treating people based on just and fair criteria, that God cannot really harm without anyone who is not deserving of that. Of course, they didn't mean that in this life no harm will come to people, but they meant this, in the eventual judgment about individual human beings, God will treat them with fairness and with justice and with compassion. So that's what they meant by Tawheed, or the unity of God, or monotheism. So the first principle was monotheism. The second, justice. Third, moral agency. They called it the promise and the warning, which is that people are morally responsible for what they do with other people, and they have always to intend the good. They should never intend evil toward other human beings. Accountability of actions, they call that intermediate positions. So if you are doing injustice, if you are aggressor, if you are taking property of others, then no matter how you say I believe in God, you have to really be held accountable in this life, and of course before the divine justice, the eternal justice. And finally, a cardinal principle of monotheism, speaking truth to power. This is the Abrahamic act. We have to speak truth to power. Now, if we cannot, we don't have the courage, or we feel ourselves very weak, then at least we should not stand in support of injustice. But if we can, and it would be, even if we cannot, but we can speak out at the expense of jeopardizing our lives, this is our moral duty, because only then injustice can be eradicated on the earth, or limited, made it like those who would like to perpetuate injustice should not have the upper hand. They should never have the upper hand. And that's basically the final principle within the Islamic rationalism. Of course, that the Mutazilites at one point had internal conflict within the Islamic community, and their tradition, their principles were passed on to the Ash'arites, and the Ash'arites had great impact on European worldview, particularly the Christian community in Europe, and the scholarly community were engaged, with the Andalusian society. Many Western scholars and philosophers, as we'll see in subsequent discussion, went to Cordoba, to the University of Cordoba, and then when this city fell to the Visigoths, during the Reconquista, then the whole Cordoba library, which has over 1 million volume, was taken to many cities within the Occident world, like France, Germany, and Britain. And these works were translated first to Latin and were part of the development of the Occidental society. I should really conclude by pointing out that Karl Jaspers suspected that modern society has its roots in the axial age. And of course, he tried to think about what made that breakthrough from the axial age to modernity. And I would like to argue that the answer is there. It's hidden from many people in modern society because of the insistence of European historians that Europe has not Europe development, of science, of philosophy, of culture, has nothing to do with Islamic world, but with the Greek world. Again, this is a big delusion, self-inflicted delusion, but it has a lot to do with the borrowing, with the interaction that lasted for many centuries with Andalusia, the Muslim Spain, with Sicily, which was ruled by Muslims, and Muslims lived there for many centuries, with Crete, and of course in the Holy Land and the area of Syria, where the Crusade interacted extensively with the Muslims and learned and borrowed a lot of their cultural habits and of their philosophy. I'm not trying to of course, here, not to be misunderstood, not trying to say that Europe also did nothing to evolve modern society. I'm not making this same mistake that some European historians and philosophers do. No, Europe has advanced and advanced in a big time, particularly in the area of politics and in the area of international law and in the area of trying to establish international organizations to bring people together and sort of create more just society. But we'll see later that this attempt has been hijacked by neoliberalism, which is bringing us back into this hierarchical society, which is contrary to the monotheistic spirit and to the modern spirit. And that is the talk of another time. Thank you for watching and staying to this moment, if you are still there. And of course, if you are listening to me, you are still there. So I wish you the best, and thank you for being here. And I look forward to see you in the next lecture.